The statement that a Jewish family owns America is not an innocent observation. It is a dangerous conspiracy theory deeply rooted in centuries of anti-Semitic prejudice. Though often passed off as political commentary or economic critique, such claims are inherently harmful, historically loaded, and factually baseless. They rely on emotional manipulation, drawing upon fear, uncertainty, and resentment to present a scapegoat for complex societal problems. Conspiracy theories like this one provide simplistic answers to difficult questions: why inequality exists, who controls political power, or why certain cultural trends dominate. Rather than examining structural causes or historical dynamics, they blame a singular, often invisible group, and for centuries, that group has too often been the Jewish community. This scapegoating tendency flourishes in times of turmoil. When people feel powerless, economically, socially, or culturally, they seek targets. Throughout history, Jews have filled that role not because of anything intrinsic, but because they were perceived as outsiders. In Europe, religious differences, linguistic separation, and social marginalization made Jewish communities easy to isolate and blame. Over time, this turned into elaborate narratives that Jews controlled finance, influenced monarchs, or plotted from the shadows. These fantasies were not fringe ideas. They were mainstream beliefs supported by religious sermons, political speeches, and mass publications. Their appeal lies in their clarity. They assign a face to suffering and offer the illusion of understanding a confusing world. Such myths have always adapted to the tools and anxieties of their era. In the medieval period, Jews were accused of poisoning wells during the plague or engaging in satanic rituals. In modern times, those accusations have shifted into suggestions of financial and political manipulation. Social media now spreads these myths faster than ever. Visual memes, edited videos, and pseudoscientific blogs dress ancient lies in modern garb, targeting younger audiences who might never have heard of anti-Semitism in its older forms. Yet the effects are no less dangerous. Words eventually lead to action. The belief in a hidden Jewish hand behind national affairs has motivated violence in recent decades, including mass shootings at synagogues and harassment campaigns against Jewish journalists and public figures. When people act on these beliefs, real lives are endangered. Refuting these lies is not just a defense of one group, it is a defense of truth, pluralism, and social cohesion. Conspiracy theories do not just target individuals, they corrode democracy, foster distrust in institutions, and provoke societal fragmentation. They are tools of hate disguised as critiques of power. In a time when truth is increasingly devalued, defending it becomes a moral and civic duty. To understand how such claims took root, one must look to the history of anti-Semitism in Europe. Jewish communities were often pushed to the margins of society, barred from owning land or joining guilds, and limited in professions. Many became moneylenders, a role despised but necessary in Christian Europe where lending with interest was considered sinful. Though forced into this niche by discrimination, Jews were later vilified for it. They were seen not as survivors of exclusion, but as greedy manipulators of Christian debt. This distorted perception laid the groundwork for the belief that Jews controlled financial systems. That belief took on global proportions with the rise of the Rothschild family in the 18th and 19th centuries. Meyer Amschel Rothschild, a Jewish banker from Frankfurt, and his 5 sons built an international banking dynasty with branches across Europe. Their success in managing wartime loans and state finances was significant, but not sinister. Still, conspiracy theorists began attributing to them powers they never held, orchestrating wars, rigging markets, even engineering revolutions. Political cartoons and polemics portrayed them as shadowy puppet masters. The Rothschilds were no longer individuals, but symbols of a supposed Jewish global agenda, a narrative that has persisted to this day despite being entirely unsupported by credible evidence. The most potent weapon in the arsenal of Jewish conspiracy myths came in 1903 with the publication of The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This forged document, purporting to reveal a Jewish plan for world domination, was quickly exposed as a fake, yet it spread like wildfire, translated into dozens of languages and embraced by anti-Semites worldwide. Adolf Hitler referenced it in Mein Kampf and used it to justify the persecution of Jews under the Nazi regime. In the United States, industrialist Henry Ford printed and distributed thousands of copies. The document was a lie, but a lie repeated often enough to become a political force. Throughout the 20th century, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories evolved with the political winds. In fascist states, Jews were blamed for communism. In communist regimes, for capitalism. They were portrayed as both the architects of social decay and the masters of cultural influence. In the post-war era, even as the world condemned the Holocaust, these myths never vanished. They simply mutated, appearing in fringe political movements, whispered in populist rhetoric, or buried in the subtext of economic criticism. In recent decades, these ideas have been revived in American culture, often through online platforms. Today, phrases like globalist, international banker, or Hollywood elite are frequently coded language for Jewish power. Public figures such as George Soros have become the focus of wild conspiracies, claiming that they are orchestrating immigration, funding civil unrest, or undermining national sovereignty, all echoing earlier accusations leveled at the Rothschilds. Social media algorithms, which reward sensational content, have amplified these messages to unprecedented scales. For many, the conspiracy is no longer whispered in secret. It is broadcast in public, liked, shared, and monetized. And yet, at its core, it remains the same tired story. That a small group of Jews secretly control the world. It is a lie born, out of fear, nurtured by ignorance and weaponized by hate. It has led to ghettos, expulsions, pogroms, and genocide. And it continues even now to threaten the safety and dignity of Jewish communities around the globe. Understanding its origins is not enough. We must also confront it, reject it, and dismantle it wherever it appears. Modern iterations of the claim that a Jewish family owns America have become increasingly sophisticated in appearance, but remain rooted in the same tired prejudices. These accusations are no longer limited to dusty pamphlets or obscure hate groups. They have entered the digital bloodstream, circulating widely across YouTube channels, podcasts, social media posts, and even mainstream political discourse. In this evolving ecosystem, the conspiracy theory often masquerades as legitimate political critique or economic analysis. It is framed not as hate, but as truth-telling, which makes it more insidious and harder to challenge. The central figures of these narratives may shift with the news cycle. Sometimes it's the Rothschilds, sometimes George Soros, sometimes vague Jewish bankers or media elites. But the underlying accusation remains consistent, that Jewish individuals or families secretly manipulate American policy, finance, and culture for their own gain. This modern evolution is particularly dangerous because it cloaks bigotry in the language of populism and free speech. People are no longer wearing swastikas and shouting in the streets. They're presenting slick videos with charts, historical quotes taken out of context, and cherry-picked data to suggest a Jewish stranglehold on American power structures. In these presentations, facts are weaponized selectively. For instance, the overrepresentation of Jews in certain professions like law, media, or finance is used not to spark discussion about cultural or historical factors, but to prove malevolent intent. The success of a few is twisted into evidence of a conspiracy by the many. Social media platforms have accelerated this phenomenon dramatically. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement often push inflammatory or emotionally charged content to the top of users' feeds. As a result, someone who watches one video questioning the Federal Reserve or banking elites may quickly find themselves recommended videos suggesting a Zionist plot or claiming Jewish control of Hollywood. The transition from skepticism to anti-Semitism can be subtle and almost invisible to the untrained eye. Young people especially are vulnerable, as they often lack historical education on anti-Semitism and may not recognize the implications of what they're consuming. When they hear, for example, that a Jewish billionaire funds immigration and destabilizes the West, they may not immediately understand how this repeats and reinforces age-old tropes that have led to violence and oppression. Beyond online spaces, These modern conspiracy theories have also found homes in political rhetoric. Politicians, both fringe and mainstream, have occasionally flirted with or outright endorsed anti-Semitic dog whistles. When a public figure speaks of globalist elites or criticizes the media mafia without clarification, they often evoke historically anti-Semitic themes even if unintentionally. Some may do it deliberately to court populist anger. Others may repeat the language without fully understanding its origins. Either way, the effect is the same: to normalize suspicion and hostility toward Jewish communities and to frame them as somehow other than the national whole. In response to these trends, Jewish organizations and allies have worked tirelessly to educate the public, flag hate speech, and build coalitions against bigotry. However, the sheer speed and volume of digital content make the task daunting. Anti-Semitism adapts, repackages itself, and spreads through channels where oversight is minimal and accountability is rare. Combating it today requires more than denunciation. It demands digital literacy, historical education, and active engagement across ideological lines. We must be able to recognize these patterns in their new forms and call them what they are: modern masks for ancient hatred. The real impact of these conspiracies cannot be measured only in words or statistics. It must be understood in human terms. When someone is repeatedly told that their religious or cultural identity makes them dangerous, powerful, or untrustworthy, it corrodes their sense of belonging. Jewish Americans are not exempt from patriotism, struggle, or civic engagement. Like all citizens, they are diverse in background, politics, and class. Yet, conspiracy theories erase that complexity. They do not see individuals, they see symbols, caricatures, and threats. And the consequences of such thinking are not abstract. They are deeply personal, deeply violent. The most devastating example of these consequences in recent memory occurred on October 27, 2018, when a gunman entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and opened fire during Shabbat services. 11 people were killed, making it the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in U.S. history. The shooter had been radicalized online. He posted about invaders and Jewish influence over immigration, a modern echo of the ancient trope that Jews secretly orchestrate global events for their own benefit. This was not the act of a lone madman. It was the end result of a culture that tolerates and even encourages conspiratorial thinking, where lies are spread unchecked and hate is dressed in the language of resistance. Other attacks have followed, including stabbings in Muncie, shootings in Jersey City, and a dramatic increase in vandalism, threats, and harassment against Jewish schools, cemeteries, and institutions. In each case, the attackers did not invent their hatred. They absorbed it. They found it online, in political discourse, and sometimes even in the silence of those who knew better, but chose not to speak. The idea that a Jewish family, or by extension, Jewish people, control America is not just false, it is lethal. Even for those who do not face physical violence, the emotional toll is immense. Jewish Americans report feeling increasingly unsafe, especially when wearing visible signs of their faith. Children grow up hearing that they are part of some sinister plot they don't understand. Professionals are suspected of nepotism, artists of propaganda, politicians of dual loyalty. These are not minor slights. They are reminders that to some, Jewish people are not really American, not really equal, not really safe. In such an atmosphere, truth-telling becomes a radical act. To say simply that Jewish families do not run America, that power is diverse and complex, and that blaming Jews for society's ills is a recycled lie, is to resist a tide of misinformation and hate. It is not enough to avoid repeating these lies. We must actively oppose them. That means challenging friends, educating the ignorant, holding media accountable, and demanding clarity and responsibility from our leaders. This is not merely a defense of one group. It is a defense of the idea that no one should be reduced to a conspiracy, that no religion or ethnicity should be turned into a political target. In the face of history, we must choose humanity. In the face of lies, we must choose truth. And in the face of rising hate, we must choose courage. To understand why the false claim that a Jewish family owns America continues to spread and gain traction in modern society, one must examine the social and psychological forces that make conspiracy theories so alluring. These theories flourish not because they are true, but because they serve emotional and cognitive needs, particularly in times of uncertainty, instability, or cultural transition. Humans have a deep-seated desire to find patterns, assign blame, and make sense of complexity. When economies falter, when politics becomes divisive, or when people feel they are losing control over their lives, they often search for a simple explanation, someone to blame. Conspiracy theories offer precisely that, a narrative where nothing is random, where events are orchestrated, and where a hidden hand is responsible for all suffering. The Jewish people, having long been framed as other, become easy targets in this narrative. This process is not new. Historically, Jews have served as scapegoats in Christian Europe, Islamic empires, communist regimes, and capitalist societies alike. The irony is glaring. In one context, they were blamed for being too wealthy, in another for being too poor, in one regime for being communists, in another for being capitalists, in one country for isolating themselves, in another for assimilating too much. These contradictory accusations demonstrate that anti-Semitism is not based on evidence or rational critique. It is a projection of deeper societal anxieties. Jews are cast into whatever role the fearful public demands: infiltrators, masterminds, agitators, or conspirators. These roles are not rooted in reality, but in the fears, myths, and cultural tensions of the societies that invent them. Today's rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories reflects a broader crisis of trust. Across the world, and especially in America, people are losing faith in institutions, in government, media, education, and even science. As democratic norms erode and corruption scandals emerge, some citizens begin to suspect that democracy itself is a facade, that someone behind the scenes is really in control. This kind of thinking opens the door to ancient conspiracies, now updated for the digital age. It is no coincidence that many of these theories center on elites or globalists, terms that often serve as euphemisms for Jews. When people no longer believe in fair elections, journalistic integrity, or social mobility, they become vulnerable to the idea that there is a hidden cabal manipulating events for its own gain. It is a short and dangerous leap from there to targeting Jewish individuals or families, especially those who are visible or successful in public life. The internet has accelerated this process. Social media platforms, forums, and anonymous image boards provide fertile ground for radicalization. Individuals can fall into echo chambers where anti-Semitic content is normalized, even celebrated. Memes, videos, and infographics frame conspiracy theories as research, giving them an air of credibility. When people encounter these materials in isolation, without historical knowledge or critical thinking skills, they may find them persuasive. The emotional appeal is strong. Anger, fear, and outrage are powerful motivators. Once someone believes that a secret group is controlling their lives, they feel empowered by the illusion of knowing the truth. They may feel morally justified in spreading that belief and, tragically, in taking action to stop it. This climate has a devastating impact on Jewish communities, who once again find themselves under suspicion simply for existing. It creates a double bind. The more successful or visible Jewish individuals become, the more they are accused of being part of a plot. But invisibility is no protection either. Jews who try to avoid public life may still be cast as shadowy manipulators working behind the scenes. The prejudice is self-reinforcing, impervious to logic or evidence. When one Jewish person is shown to be ethical, charitable, or unconnected to power, the conspiracy simply shifts focus. It is not falsifiable. It is designed to survive every contradiction. What makes this even more painful is that Jewish communities in America have historically worked toward the very ideals conspiracy theorists claim are being destroyed. Jewish immigrants and their descendants have contributed enormously to American culture, science, civil rights, and democracy. From fighting for labor reforms to marching for civil rights, Jewish Americans have often stood at the forefront of progressive causes, and yet instead of being recognized for these contributions, they are vilified. Their loyalty is questioned, their patriotism doubted, their influence feared. This is not just hurtful, it is dehumanizing. In such an atmosphere, the burden of defending against lies falls not only on Jews, but on society at large. This is not a Jewish problem. It is a societal illness. When conspiracies take root, they poison the well of democracy. They foster mistrust, divide communities, and invite violence. They erode our ability to distinguish truth from fiction, and they prepare the ground for authoritarianism. A society that tolerates conspiracy theories about Jews will soon find itself inventing conspiracies about others, immigrants, minorities, intellectuals, or any group perceived as different or threatening. The logic of the conspiracy is viral. It spreads, mutates, and corrupts everything it touches. The fight against these lies requires more than fact-checking. It requires education, historical, moral, and civic. People must be taught not just the truth, but how to think critically, how to recognize propaganda, and how to empathize with those who are different. Schools must teach the history of anti-Semitism, alongside other forms of hatred, not as a footnote but as a central lesson in the dangers of prejudice. Media outlets must take responsibility for how they frame stories about power, wealth, and identity. Politicians must speak clearly and courageously when anti-Semitism appears, even if doing so costs them votes. And everyday citizens must be willing to confront hate in their own circles, online, at work, in families, or among friends. Ultimately, the question is not whether a Jewish family owns America. That is an absurd and dangerous lie. The question is whether we, as a society, will allow that lie to fester and grow, whether we will retreat into suspicion and scapegoating, or whether we will reaffirm our commitment to truth, justice, and the dignity of all people. The answer to that question will shape not only the future of the Jewish community, but the future of democracy itself. It is not enough to merely reject the falsehood that a Jewish family owns America. We must understand how such narratives become tools of manipulation in broader political agendas. Throughout history, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories have been used not only to marginalize Jews, but also to distract the public from real sources of inequality, corruption, or systemic failure. By blaming a minority group, especially one with visible cultural or economic contributions, leaders can redirect frustration and anger away from themselves and toward an imagined enemy. In this sense, conspiracy theories are not just mistaken beliefs, they are political weapons. Take, for example, the way some populist movements frame issues like global economic instability or immigration. Rather than critically examining the complex interplay of globalization, trade policy, climate change, and war, they often reduce the problem to a single cause: the Jews. The theory then goes that Jewish financiers manipulate economies, Jewish media manipulates minds, and Jewish politicians manipulate borders, all to achieve world domination or cultural decay. This is not only false, it's a calculated distraction. It keeps working people from organizing for fair wages, from questioning corporate monopolies, from demanding health care, or from addressing systemic racism. By focusing hatred on a scapegoated community, the people in real positions of power, regardless of race, religion, or background, avoid scrutiny. The conspiracy becomes a smokescreen that hides rather than reveals the truth. The danger here is not just rhetorical. When society adopts a narrative that identifies a specific group as the source of all its problems, that group becomes a permanent target. Laws are passed to restrict them, their businesses are boycotted, their neighborhoods are surveilled, their children are harassed in schools. In the worst cases, they are rounded up, expelled, or exterminated. History is replete with such examples, from medieval expulsions in Europe to pogroms in Tsarist Russia to the horrors of the Holocaust. Each began not with violence, but with words, lies spread about Jewish power, wealth, and control. In modern America, where free speech is protected and diversity is, at least aspirationally, a national value, these lies often take subtler forms. They appear in phrases like Zionist control, international bankers, or Hollywood elite, terms that serve as code for Jews without explicitly naming them. This linguistic camouflage allows anti-Semitism to operate in polite society, evading accountability while spreading mistrust and hatred. The coded language also allows the speaker to deny their prejudice. I didn't say Jews, I said globalists. But the implication is clear, especially when paired with decades of tropes, caricatures, and dog whistles. This is why education is not a luxury. It is a necessity. A society that fails to teach its young people the origins and consequences of anti-Semitism is one that risks repeating the same tragedies. Schools must go beyond teaching the Holocaust as an isolated atrocity. They must explore the ideologies, propaganda, and policies that led to it, and how similar mechanisms operate today. Students should learn how economic anxiety, national humiliation, and social alienation can create fertile ground for hatred. They should analyze how lies become normalized when they are repeated often enough, and how decent people can become complicit through silence. Beyond schools, media institutions have a moral responsibility to avoid amplifying anti-Semitic tropes. Sensational headlines, careless generalizations, and uncritical platforming of conspiratorial voices all contribute to the problem. Media should avoid perpetuating myths about Jewish overrepresentation or hidden influence unless they are contextualized with nuance and sensitivity. For instance, mentioning that some Jewish individuals are successful in finance or entertainment is not inherently problematic, but failing to explain the historical, cultural, or migratory reasons for those patterns, and instead suggesting coordinated control, feeds dangerous assumptions. Social media companies must also confront their role. Algorithms that reward outrage and engagement have made conspiracy theories more profitable than truth. Anti-Semitic content once pushed to the margins now reaches millions with a single click. While freedom of speech must be preserved, it is not an excuse for apathy. Platforms can enforce their own terms of service without government interference. They can promote counter-narratives, amplify trusted voices, and deplatform known spreaders of hate. The internet is not neutral. It is shaped by the choices of developers, designers, and policy teams. If those choices are left unexamined, they will inevitably serve the loudest, most extreme, and most harmful actors. But perhaps the most important arena is everyday life. Combating the myth of Jewish control is not just the job of governments, educators, or tech companies. It's the responsibility of everyone. When a friend repeats a conspiracy, challenge it. When a colleague makes a joke about Jews running, Hollywood or the banks, don't laugh it off. When a community leader uses coded language, ask for clarification. Silence is not neutrality, it is permission. And hatred, once permitted, never stays confined to one group. It spreads, consumes, and destroys. Jewish communities have lived through this before. They have rebuilt after pogroms, genocide, and exile. They have survived slavery in ancient Egypt, destruction in Jerusalem, exile in Babylon, persecution in Europe, and now, rising hate in the digital age. They will continue to endure, but that should not be the standard we settle for. Survival is not justice. Safety is not enough. Dignity, truth, and inclusion must be our goals. At its core, the lie that a Jewish family owns America is not about Jews. It is about fear. It is about the human need to find someone to blame when the world feels uncertain. But indulging that fear leads only to division, violence, and decay. The path forward lies in rejecting falsehoods and building a society where power is scrutinized honestly, where diversity is respected, and where no one is reduced to a stereotype. We must replace the old narratives with new ones, not of scapegoating, but of shared struggle and shared humanity.